All right, everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. The first thing I want you all to do is give yourself a big round of applause for being here and for wanting to learn and getting all of this great knowledge, credit, taking control of your debt. From our speakers tonight, Martina and Kathy. I'm just so excited that you guys are here and ready to learn. So, without further ado, I want to get things started. But the first thing I want to just remind you is that if you want to come off camera, we love to see your faces. You're welcome to do that. But just remember to stay on mute so that we can hear our speakers. And one last thing, if you would like to change your name from Savvy Ladies Guest to whatever your name is, you can just right click if you're using a PC and rename yourself. That way, if you do have a question, we can address you by your name and know which Savvy Ladies was speaking. But without further ado, I want to turn it over to Martina, and I want to give you a great big thank you for being here and doing this with us. So, Martina, take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. And I'll echo that sentiment. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, well, this evening. And for also, for those of you that were able to attend the prior sessions, thank you for attending those as well. I'm going to go through a couple of materials. And so the first thing I wanted to start out with is just a brief disclaimer, just to express that the views and opinions expressed in this webinar are my own and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position of Synchrony Financial. Any content shared is for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional advice or company endorsements. So now that we've gotten the legal stuff out of the way, I will going to start off just with a brief recap of where we started these sessions. And so for those of you that were able to attend, thank you for coming. And for those of you who are not, I think they're also available on Savvy Ladies Workshop. But we started this journey with first understanding your credit score. And, part of that is it's very important to understand what the components are, how that affects you over time. And so, we started out with just a few learnings. Good building a good credit history, what the benefit of that is. And it allows you to make big purchases, allows you to get car loans, to even get rental property. The benefit of paying your bills on time. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that factors in, significantly into your credit score. And then also, as we know, we're in a lowering interest rate environment right now, but interest rates can be really high and they can affect the affordability of certain purchases. And then in session 2, Kathy took you all through the smart ways to use credit. And so thinking through really, what types of credit cards make sense? How do you build credit? Looking at things like promotional financing. We talked a little bit about zero interest versus deferred interest. And then also if you're struggling with your credit, not-for-profit agencies that you might be able to talk to. I do have some of those resources at the end of this slideshow, and you will be able to get a copy of this through the Savvy Ladies website. So now we're starting our debt management and budgeting journey. And so I'm just going to take you through a little bit of how we are going to progress today. So first off, we're going to start with where's my money going? So part of a key budget is understanding where it is that you get, what your sources of income are and where that income is going. And then also if there's anything that you're buying that's unnecessary. So what can you cut back on or stop? And then to the extent that you're able to find some surplus, how should you allocate it? And sometimes there isn't much surplus, so maybe we have to think about other sources of income. And as a last resort, if you can't afford to pay off your debt, what are some options that you have? So I guess before I get into the meat of this, I wanted to encourage everyone, please, we want this to be interactive. We want it to be a conversation. So if you have questions, ask them at any time. Do not necessarily hold them to the end. And, as Tracy indicated, please feel free to come on camera and answer your question live. And so the first question is, where is your money going? And so I think about it in two parts. First, we should be identifying all of our income and our assets. And then we need to track and document our expenses. And so, the normal forms of income we have are our weekly wages, or depending on how you're paid. But there's other income that you might get. You might have investment income. You might have one-time income from bonuses, tips, dividends on bank accounts, spousal and child support, tax returns. I'm going to pause on tax returns for a minute because I think sometimes we think of money from tax returns as a bonus at the end of the year. But I would encourage you to count that as part of your budget for the year. And so you're thinking about it and you're spending it strategically and thinking about it for your savings and also for paying off your debt. And then once you have a sense of what your sources of income are, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about how you might look and identify those, I would encourage you to track and document all expenses. And so some people will simply do that through a notebook. And so you might just, start at the beginning of the month and record all of the bills you paid. Or, you might have a spreadsheet. There are different apps available, but really identifying everything your money is going towards is going to be the foundation of successful budgeting. And so on the next slide, I wanted to go through a few strategies for tracking income and expenses. And so the first part is you have to review your income. And so pay stubs, Social Security and pension statements, tax documents. You want to review your bank statements, investment statements, your credit card accounts monthly, just to make sure you know like exactly what you're spending. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that you're tracking where you're paying for in cash. I think sometimes it's very easy to just pay for things and not think about them. And even small amounts, cups of coffee, things that you might buy from a corner store. Make sure you're keeping all of that and save. Like if you have receipts, a lot of times you can decline getting a receipt. Try to keep those receipts because I think a lot of times that keeps us honest on what did we actually pay for. And you can, as I said on the last slide, you can use a notebook or spreadsheet to record that. And the other thing you want to keep track of, but maybe not part of your monthly budget, is irregular income and expenses. We know on the last call, we got a question from someone who worked on a consulting basis and didn't necessarily have income every month. It's important to note, when you expect to receive income and keep track of that, but you might not want to build that into the amount of money you have to spend monthly because it's not something that you're getting on a regular basis. And another strategy you can use is creating separate bank accounts for your bills, for your discretionary spending, and for your savings. And so a lot of employers allow you to just directly deposit your income into separate accounts. And you can think about taking advantage of that so that it doesn't work for you. If you know you have a specific pot of money to pay for bills, you can use that. You can just direct it to that account. And then you can use like automatic withdrawals to pay your bills. Another thing I would recommend is just reviewing this routinely because, a budget's not going to be a set it and forget it exercise. Things come up, things change. And so you want to make sure that you're factoring that in over time. So now that we've talked through how you might track things, let's talk a little bit about, once you've done that, what are you going to do with that information? And so the first thing I would say is let's categorize what you have as what are your needs versus what are your wants. And so like obviously you need a roof over your head. So that is a need. But where you're living might not be necessary. Maybe you can downsize. So think about like, what is the minimum amount you need to sustain yourself? And then what is over that? And so I've identified some, things that are not necessarily needs on the list, like cosmetics. I love makeup as just as much as anyone else, but maybe I don't need to go to Sephora every month. Dining out or takeout. Sometimes it can get really expensive over time. So think about, meals that you can prepare at home. Entertainment. I enjoy the movies. I enjoy shows. I enjoy things, but maybe it's not every month. Maybe it's, every now and then. I think another sneaky thing is subscriptions. They really pile up. We have subscriptions to Spotify on our phones. We have subscriptions to different channels, etc. And so you should really take account of the things that you sign up for because over time you're still being billed for them and sometimes you're not even using them. And then obviously, clothing and shoes. I think, everyone likes, nice things, but, really take an account of the things that you actually need and try to, cut back on those things over time just to by, saying like, okay, well, maybe I don't need, a new suit this month or I don't need new shoes this month. So going on to the next slide, this is like I'm going over with strategies of like how to budget. So once you've taken that assessment and you've said, okay, here's what I have, here's what I can come back on, how should it be allocated across your income? So one common approach is the 50-30-20 rule. And I think a lot of you have heard about it. We've talked about it on the prior call. And that approach is really saying, okay, you think about your income into three categories. Needs, and so that's like your rent, your basic necessities, groceries, etc. Wants, so those are like your entertainment and discretionary expenses, and then savings. And then obviously you have to think about, it's not going to be the same range for everyone, because the cost of living in New York is very high. That's where I live. And so needs might be a little bit higher for someone who's living in New York. But if your cost of living is lower, you might be able to like allocate a little bit less to needs. But this is an overall sort of framework for how you should be thinking about allocating your money. The fact of the matter is that sometimes, we might not be able to put a lot of money into savings. I would say I encourage everyone to put something into savings, because one thing that is it builds the discipline of being able to do it over and over again. It might not be a large amount, but putting away something and not tapping into it unless you absolutely need to is a great habit to build. The other example of budgeting that I put on the other side is just zero-based budgeting, which just says you take everything that you've made over the course, everything that you've made, and then everything that you have to pay for, and you just allocate every dollar to something. And so that can be a really simple way to start as you start thinking about maybe creating a framework for how you approach your budgeting. I'm going to go to a few questions in the chat. So I see someone ask, can you touch on how we save money on everyday necessities relating to inflation? That's a tricky question because the prices of things are going up. I do think that one, we have to do a little bit of research. Sometimes if you look around and shop around a bit, you might be able to find day-to-day essentials a little bit cheaper. There are certain items that like you'll notice this like in Amazon, right? Things that you buy routinely over and over again. Sometimes you can get a subscription for those things and save a little bit of money on it. But that's will obviously only be for repeating things that you need over and over again. But it's not an easy thing. But I think what we have to do is think about the things that we're buying that we consider necessities and determine whether or not they're actually necessities. And also if we can stretch them a bit over time. I hope that answered the question.
Martina, can I jump in for a second too on that one?
Sure.
Yeah, so I would also suggest, like, especially for groceries, because I think the price of groceries varies a lot from store to store, right? If you're
Mhm.
shopping at Whole Foods, let's say, versus like Aldi or Walmart. And so there are probably ways, and then even as you're shopping, look for the things that are on sale, right? Maybe you just buy the store brand or look for what's on sale. So I think there's a lot of ways to save, especially on like groceries, by just shopping around, doing price
Yeah,
comparisons, maybe clipping coupons and things like that.
yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Kathy. So the next slide is, about how would you allocate any surplus? And so we covered on the last slide that, we should be saving about 20% of our income, if possible. But maybe that 20% has to be used for something else, right? And so you should think about, do you have an emergency fund? So if you haven't been able to, have enough savings, maybe you want to put that away. Do you have any upcoming large expenses, right? So like you might have young children or you might have children going into college. You might have to have a medical procedure. How many years away from you are you from retirement? That's something else you might want to consider because sometimes, you might want to save more when you're close to retirement and you can afford to save a little bit less before then. And the other big question that we have to ask is how much debt do we owe? Because that might really impact how much you're able to save. And I'm going to talk a little bit about on the next slide. And so if you are, in debt and you have to, and you need to be able to pay that off, which is very important, as Catherine has covered on in our prior sessions. The two common ways they tell people to approach it is either the avalanche method, which is the preferred method because you tackle the debt that has the highest interest at the beginning, and which then allows you to sort of save money over time because obviously interest is going to accrue more on those higher interest debts. But some people need small wins. And so they would recommend the snowball method for that because sometimes if you just have like a $200 or $300 debt, it might not be the highest interest, but it feels great getting that off, getting that out of your budget for the month. And so I think, you have to pick what's the one that's best for you, the one that's going to work for you. But, all things compared, the avalanche method is always going to be the one that's going to, save you more in the long run. Okay, no further questions, but please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. And then on the next slide, and this is where the debt, paying off your debt becomes really important. Kathy talked in the last session about, the affordability factor of good credit. And if you have a lot of debt, how that affects your debt to income ratio. And so if you look at how much your debt, how your debt is supposed to compare to your income, it factors in, like, what will you be able to get for a loan, or if you wanted to make a big purchase. And so the good debt to income ratios are usually 36% or less. And then you get into like a fair and riskier range the higher you go on that threshold. And that really translates into real world issues if your debt to income ratio is high. And so, like, when you're thinking about paying down your debt, how much debt you can, comfortably have, think about, how that compares to your ratio, your income over time, and then how that might affect the things you're able to buy. Um, and so the last item in this section I think we have to cover is to sometimes, like, if you might not have ways to get rid of everything. You might have already slimmed your budget down to the bare minimum and there's nothing else. And so one question we have to ask is, okay, are there ways for you to increase your income? And so some common ways would be to sell items online. There are a lot of good websites for things like that, things that are either lightly used or gently used, you could repurpose. A lot of people do ride share or deliveries. Becoming, especially in certain cities, driving Ubers and doing deliveries a lot easier. Tutoring or teaching can be really good. Like if you're in an area that has young children or other people, or if you have a specific skill set that you can offer to people. Pet sitting or dog walking, if you like pets, might be an option. Another thing, and a friend of mine actually did this, like if you don't have a spare room in your house, some people actually rent out their cars, their primary vehicles, if you don't need them. And I think that can be a very interesting way to earn additional money. And if not, you might consider a part-time job. And if it's available, potentially renegotiating your salary. Sometimes, if your boss is amenable to it, it might be a possibility for you to get a few extra dollars. Um, and then I think, we're at the sort of last resort. If you still can't afford to pay off your debt, what are the things that you can do? A lot of credit card companies will negotiate with you. So you might want to call your credit card company and ask them for a financial hardship program or what they can work out with you. Another option would be maybe a debt consolidation loan or a balance transfer credit card. I would say beware of those items if you really can't afford it. Because I think if you're going to do something like that, you want to make sure you're securing a good rate and you can pay it off within the time that makes sense. But if you're going to end up just transferring from one card to another, you're probably over time, it's not going to work out the best way for you. And if it's student loan debt that you're worried about, I would consider, student loan repayment programs and debt forgiveness. I did include a small note on this in terms of debt settlement companies. You hear about them a lot, but they should be an absolute last resort. And you really want to consider whether or not, what the fees are, the impact to your credit score. A lot of times they tell you to stop paying your debt. And in that case, your credit score could start falling. And then also any tax implications, because if they relieve a certain amount of your debt, you're likely going to be taxed on that amount. And the one thing I call out here is the reason why you want to make sure you're tackling your debt up front is that their payment history impacts 35% of your credit score. And so if you delay and if you let things fall behind, that really can impact your ability to get access to good credit. And so I am looking at on the questions, how long does hard inquiries stay on your credit? I don't know that answer off the top of my head.
I don't know
But
either. Let me look it up really quickly.
I know that's what
I
I'm
want to
looking.
say 2 years. Let me look really quickly. But I think we talked about
I
in
think
the
it's for up to 2 years. That's at least what
yeah.
I'm seeing on the internet.
And I think what we talked about in the credit scores section is that so first of all, for people who don't know what a hard inquiry is, it is when you actually go and apply for a loan, then that creates a hard inquiry on your credit bureau. If you just have one or two, that's not going to harm your credit score. If you have, many in a short period of time, that will harm your credit score. But it is okay to open up new credit cards or loans, every so often. A couple a year is probably not going to hurt your credit score.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. And so the next example is for those of you who joined us before might be familiar with this, but we wanted to reinforce this topic because the holidays are approaching. And Kathy in the last webinar gave the example of if you had an $1,000 balance on a credit card, how the interest rates would rise over time, depending on your monthly payment, depending on the interest rate and like considering a monthly payment at the minimum. And so I'm using the same example because, I was looking at some information on the internet, and the average American is expected to spend about $1,000 this holiday season. And so thinking through like how that will impact you over time, whether or not you decided to spend that $1,000 in cash or if you wanted to spend it in credit, and particularly if you spent it in a high interest rate credit card option. And so you can see over this that, if you spent it in cash, it costs you no interest over time. If you spent it in credit at 10%, you're talking $147 in interest and you're paying it off for almost 3 years. And then it increases up to $776 in interest in over 4 years. And that's really just contemplating that you're actually paying it. And so you want to make sure that you're budgeting for these holiday expenses, no matter what vehicle you're using to pay for them. I would also encourage you that if you can't afford to spend $1,000 in gifts, try to limit the number of gifts. Find other ways to sort of celebrate the holidays with your family and friends. As I said, shop with cash or no or low interest credit options. And think about saving for the holidays in advance. If you know that you have things that you want to buy, think about, at the beginning of the year, can I set aside $100 a month so that I have this available and I don't have to think about paying for it afterwards? And also, if you do use your credit card, because maybe you get points for that, and we talked about some of the rewards in other sessions, try to pay it off before the interest accrues. Try to pay it off, on that statement, because that's going to save you a lot over time. The last thing you want is that an $1,000 expense turns to almost a $2,000 expense. And so I'm going to, pause a bit, see if anyone has comments. I see someone said they love Black Friday discounts. We do as well. And that might be another way of, looking, trying to beat inflation, because things will go on sale in the next few weeks. And so if you're looking for making a big purchase, think about aligning those around the times of like holiday discounts, right? Usually Memorial Day, Black Friday, around the 4th of July, they're usually good discount times. So try to like make those bigger purchases or plan those bigger purchases when there are larger discounts. Okay. You all are an easy crowd tonight.
Can I ask
And
a
so,
question?
sure.
Um, so if I had money in a savings account
Mm-hmm.
for like your rainy day fund,
Yep.
so it's cash available in case of emergency, but I am holding a balance, let's say 5,000 on a credit card that has an interest rate. Is it better for me to have the rainy day or pay the money off? Like that's what I
Yeah. And
don't like.
I think some ways it depends, right? Because you want a little bit in your rainy day fund. You probably don't want to get rid of all of it.
Right.
But you should think about, how much of that can you pay down and still keep a comfortable buffer? And if you have income coming in, can you be thinking about saving more so you can be replenishing that rainy day fund over time while still paying a little bit more on your credit cards? I know that's not like a straightforward answer, but I do think that you never want to be without money
So
if you need it.
yeah, no, but
But
that's kind of what, because I was thinking I could use, if I basically stopped using that paid it down to 30% and
mhm,
then use the cash to pay for that. It seems like it might make more sense because then I'm not paying any interest or just
exactly.
paying interest on the 30%. And then I still would have the room on that credit card in case of an emergency.
Emergency. That's
Right.
also a
So,
potential strategy. And also I think, we all know our personal circumstances better than others, right? And so you might have other things that you can lean on if there were an emergency, right? Um, and so I think, like I'm see the message in the chat, how many months should the emergency cash account hold? Generally, they say about 3 to 6 months you want an emergency cash, but if you have friends or family you can lean on, or if you have assets you could sell, you might be able to be, comfortable without that much at a particular portion of time. Or if you think you can replenish it over time relatively quickly, right? And so these are all different considerations. But if it's just you that you're relying on and you're not in good health, or there's a, potential emergency expense, or hurricane season is coming. Those are things that might make you want to hold on to a little bit more cash.
Cash. Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so I think I got to the question, Monica. So it's basically, usually they recommend about 3 to 6 months because you want to be able to cover your living expenses should something happen. You're welcome. Any other questions from the group? Okay. Well, so I'm just going to go through a bit of a summary of what we went over today. So the first thing is create a detailed budget, right? You want to track all income and expenses and understanding where your cash is going and coming. Setting clear financial goals. And so to that your question, is your financial goal to build a 6 month worth of savings? Is your financial goal to save for a home? Is your financial goal to pay off all your credit card debt? You should know what's motivating you going in and which one is most important so you can prioritize it. Then the next one, prioritize debt repayment. I do think that's so important because it can really take away over time, how much you're able to save. Thinking back to that $1,000 example, that $776 makes a big difference, right? So if you could have, paid it off, if you had a lower interest rate, you might have qualified for a lower interest rate if you didn't have so much debt. So you have to really think about how that calculus works out and how much it costs you in interest over time. Avoiding new debt. And so I think if you have high balances on your credit cards and you don't have an absolute need to use them, try not to use your credit for that. You don't want to incur debt while you have debt. And if you're incurring debt, you should try to incur good debt, right? Like good debt would be a home purchase or, a car or something like that at a low interest rate, but try not to incur debt that's unnecessary. Automate savings. And so I talked about this earlier. You can, if your employer offers it, you can set up a direct deposit directly to a savings account, and you can apportion a certain amount of each paycheck to go there. That takes the, think work out of it. You don't have to think about how it's getting there. It's there. But then I also encourage you, make sure that you're not tapping into that savings unless you absolutely have to. The money's there. It looks great when it's growing, but you'll feel better about it over time when you have something there when you need it. The other thing is establish an emergency fund. It's important to have. Obviously, if you have access to credit, that can help supplement you if there was an emergency. But at some point, you're going to have to pay that back, and potentially at very high interest rates. So think about, putting away a certain amount of your monthly, 3 to 6 months worth of your living expenses so that you can afford, so that you can have a buffer to live on. So I'm reading the question. I read that the emergency fund should cover all your month living expenses for a minimum of 3 months. Is that true? Sorry, I'm missing a part. Or should we use it for that emergency that comes up? I'm sorry, I'm not following the questions a little bit in terms of okay, the question is it just for living expenses or could it be for any potential emergency? And I guess it depends, right? So effectively, it's not necessarily, if you had, let's say, a large medical issue, you might have to tap into your emergency fund, right? Because that is your only emergency source of funds. The idea of the size of it is just, I think most people are planning for a potential layoff. And that's why they think it should be 3 to 6 month worth of living expenses. But, and that's, like how they generally recommend the size of it. But what it's actually used for, it can be used for any emergency. And then the other thing I would say, sorry, I accidentally went forward, is to practice self-discipline. So like I was saying before, is that, even if it's $10 a month, $20 a month, try to put away some money and not tap into it because it is really a habit. And if you don't develop the habit, it will be very hard to, learn it. And so you really have to just practice it while you might have lesser amounts to put away. And then when you have larger amounts to put away, you'll really, 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 I think, see that it was well worth it because you'll make sure that you'll do that going forward. The other thing that I've seen a lot of people doing are spending fasts. And, some people do no spend January, which is a very interesting approach where you just say that I am not spending any money on discretionary items this month. So they won't have takeout. They won't have their Starbucks coffee. They won't buy new clothes or shoes. And it's just an interesting way of tracking the things that you actually need to spend on versus the things that you were buying when you had less discipline. So I would encourage folks that if you're interested, there are a lot of people who do it. Consider it. I see someone said they do that during Lent. So whatever the season aligns with, but think about like, what is it that you really don't need? And then the other thing would be, find other sources of income. We talked about this a few slides ago. Are there side gigs, freelancing opportunities, or other like hobbies you can monetize? I have a good friend who crochets and she makes really beautiful things. She gives them to us for free, but she could probably charge us for them. So think about how your hobbies can like actually translate into extra income. And then remember, this is not a static item. You have to review and adjust it regularly. So as your income changes, as your potential emergencies change, right? Like, you might have a new home, you might have, kids, grandkids, etc. Think about how you're organizing your budget around your life events and make sure you're doing that regularly. I would say at least quarterly. And on the last two slides, we have assembled just a few resources. So Catherine went over in the last, some not-for-profit credit and financial counseling services that you might tap into. And I think Savvy Ladies has a new partnership with the NFCC. And then on the last slide, I've compiled, a budget worksheet, different calculators, other budget resources. The important thing about the slide is that I've only compiled things that are free. I do know that there's a lot of apps and different products they offer that you can pay for. But if we're trying to save money, we should be taking care of free resources. So I would encourage you to use Savvy Ladies budgeting worksheet, use their financial helpline if you have, really, other questions about how to, manage your debt, how to budget, and try these calculators. The calculators are really good in terms of like figuring on like how much you need to repay to pay off your debt over a certain period of time, whether or not, a house is affordable. We had a question on a call the last time about renting versus buying. And so there's a calculator that can show you the benefits, based on at what level of rent you can afford versus how much you could afford to buy a house. So I just encourage you to look at these resources as well. Okay, well, that was all of the prepared content I had. So I will turn it over to the group to see if there's any more questions. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Tracy?
So actually, I was going to say it's a good point that you had mentioned with the NFCC and the difference between like a debt management program and you mentioned it before, not a consolidation, but there's two different
Oh,
types.
yes. So we were talking about like the debt settlement companies
There we
versus
go.
like a consolidation loan. Yeah.
Right.
Um, I see a question. What are some of the biggest budget mistakes that we should be aware of? I could start, but I would love Kathy and Tracy, your thoughts on it. I think that one of the biggest budget mistakes is just not counting everything, right? I think, those sneaky little dollars that we spend on, like I picked up this thing, but I didn't count it this month. Or, yes, exactly, under budgeting is exactly what I would say is one of the biggest budget mistakes because we don't have full transparency into our finances.
Just in general, not doing it.
Yes, that's it.
It's unfortunate, but if I get into the habit of not writing things down or just looking at my bank account and not taking into account that there are things that are automatically going to come out,
Yeah.
that's when I start to get in trouble. So it's really making that plan and sticking to it. And one thing I always like to say from the Savvy Ladies point of view is use something that's comfortable for you. There are so many tools to budget,
Mhm.
but none of them are ideal for everybody. So choose the one that you know you're going to use it, whether it be our worksheet, which is great if you know Excel, but if you don't, you may not, you may find it confusing. We have a workbook online too that has a little bit of a budget worksheet in it too. So just find that thing that works for you because that's what you're going to stick to ultimately,
Yeah.
is what I find.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And maybe one other thought would be like after you do the initial budget, really understanding, first of all, do you have discretionary income?
Hmm.
That or are you really, not able to even pay your bills, right? And I think, and then understanding, like once you understand what is that discretionary income, making sure that you really stick there because those are your, you know, purchases that are going to vary month to month. So really
Yes.
understanding like this is like X amount is my discretionary income. And then, maybe you take out cash and it's like, okay, for any discretionary purchase, I've got this amount of cash and I'm paying for things with cash. Or like Martina was saying, like you put that in a separate account and once you've, spent that, it's done, it's gone. So I think that's, maybe one of the big mistakes is not really understanding what is that sort of money that you have just for discretionary.
Hmm.
And if
Yeah,
you don't have any, right, if you're at sort of like a negative,
exactly.
that's when you have to start tapping into some of these other things and
Right.
making
The
those
bank.
hard calls about,
Yeah.
how much do I pay off my debt versus save and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I see. Can you tell us some tips for saving money on insurance, like life insurance or car insurance? I know that there are a lot of like aggregators around that will give you good quotes on insurance. I think it's really about shopping around. I often, like if I'm looking for new life insurance, I'll ask friends, like, who they're using, and just compare rates on that. But I do think that it's just really doing the groundwork and figuring out, where you can get best rates. But there are a lot of websites that'll help you do that as well.
I agree. Even like ChatGPT, like now that we've
Mm.
got ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT, right? Say, here's my current insurance, here's how much I'm paying, here's my deductible, are there other options for me? Like ChatGPT is
Yeah.
actually pretty good at
Wonderful.
doing
Yep.
things like this. And one more
Yes.
thought is for both the, health insurance and car, and home insurance, think about what deductible you're comfortable paying. Because if you are, willing to have a higher deductible, you can probably pay lower in your, whether it's monthly or annual insurance rates. But then just make sure that if you, have enough money set aside in your rainy day fund to cover that deductible if and when you would need to do that. But, the insurance companies they make money off you, right? So,
Mhm.
it's really important to think about the level of insurance you need versus that deductible versus what you want to pay out of pocket every month.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I also think like they just asked like there's a lot of different ranges, cheap insurance online, so I'm a bit wary of them. And I do think you have to understand what you're getting, right? And so to Catherine's point, you want to know what the deductible is. But then there's also like a lot of bells and whistles in insurance, right? And so like when you might have to pay, what's actually covered. Like if you're thinking about car insurance, there might be glass coverage in some. Um, and wheel coverage in some, policies and not in others, right? But like, do you really need it? Is it that much that you would have to pay for the tire or not? Do you have AAA? Right. So you might not need towing insurance if you have AAA that'll pick you up. So I think you have to think about like what's actually factored into the policy. And so I think some of those cheaper policies are just pretty, straightforward and they may not have all the bells and whistles, but you might not need them, particularly if you have an older car too. So think about that.
And then don't get us started at throwing teen drivers in the mix.
Oh, yes.
That's when you really need to shop around.
Exactly. And it's even harder. Yeah. I feel like yeah, my insurance skyrocketed as soon as my son turned 16. And and what can you do with that? But yeah. But these are
So,
all great questions.
yeah, this is great. So, oh, that's a great one about scams.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something that we have talked about. And what's the bottom line? If it sounds too good to be true, it's
It
not.
probably is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, like, and there's like the Better Business Bureau. I mean, the great thing I feel like now about the internet, so to Catherine's point about ChatGPT, is that if you Google most company names and you ask it, like people will have, there are always chat streams in Google, in Yelp, in Reddit, in everywhere. And so you can get a pretty good idea of whether something's a scam or not from doing a little bit of research. Because people review almost everything that happens, right? Like, and that, for better or for worse.
I mean, if someone's calling you over the phone and demanding money, probably a scam. You
Yes.
can always hang up and then go and find if they're claiming to be a debt collector. You can hang up and then go and call the customer service of the company that they claim to be with.
Mhm.
You then make the phone call with the information that you know to be true off of your statement or login online accounts. I mean, that, there's no harm in just not answering it or hanging up on them if you feel like it's a
Yeah.
scam, and then do the research to find out if it was or not.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And read the fine print too. I know that a lot of car insurance companies were offering deals if they could track your driving record, right? And you'd literally have an app on your phone that would be able to track, how often you're in the car, if you're stopping hard, etc. And your rate could go up monthly based on your tracking. That's not something you might want, right? Um, and so, depending on the kind of driver you are, how often you drive, and if you're in a city or not. And so I do think sometimes like those deals can look better on paper than when they actually are, in real life. So you want to make sure you're reading the fine print and understanding that variability.
I think it's all about the hard work of putting in what you're putting into it, to really get the best out of it. Comparing the plans. If you do the heavy lifting up front, then it's going to make it easier for you as you go along.
Yeah. And another question is like, do you know if it's possible to negotiate your insurance to lower your bill? I've had, success sometimes, but usually it means removing something. It means,
Mhm.
hiring the deductible or, um, they'll tell you, well, you have this coverage, you might not really need it, or taking a defensive driving course. So they'll recommend that sometimes. So I think usually it's, maybe a little bit of change. They're not going to just reduce your rate. But I don't know if Tracy or Kathy, you've had any success in the past.
No.
Yeah.
That really works for like your cell phone bill, your
Hmm.
internet. You should be reviewing those. As Martina had mentioned before, this is not a static document. Your budget is not static. You should be revisiting it often, to review that. I know, the one guilty pleasure that I have that I like to have is XM radio. I
Yes.
just like it. I know it's a
Mhm.
cost I don't need, but that's my one guilty pleasure. But if I don't call, in fact, this reminds me because it's like every November I have to call because they'll raise the rates. And I have to say, well, I would like to stay at the rate I'm at. And it's like it goes up almost double. So I have a sticky note hanging on my computer that says call XM in November. It's been there for years. But
Yeah.
you need to just keep looking for that and keep calling. I know sometimes it's a lot of work. We don't want to do it, but do you think in the long run how much you're saving? It really
Yes.
does work out.
For sure. And keeping track of those things, I think I was talking about earlier about like managing subscriptions, right? And so
Mhm.
we've all bought a trial just to be able to, see something, do something. But if you forget to cancel it, then you have that monthly fee, right?
Yeah,
And sometimes you might want to keep it, but you might not remember, you might not use Apple TV after a couple of months or something. And so really like keeping to your point, Tracy, keeping track of those things and being sure to follow up on them. It's not the most fun thing to do, but it does save us money over time.
it does. So how does everybody feel? Let's take the temperature of the room. Um, how does everybody feel about your existing budget? Do you feel thumbs up? You don't know? Give us a reaction on how you're feeling.
What about tips for saving money on rent? Well, that's a great thumbs up, Cassandra. Unfortunately, I feel like it's hard to negotiate with landlords, right? Depending on where you live. And so I think it's really assessing whether, the space that you're living in is the most affordable space. And is there somewhere else you might be able to live more affordably, unfortunately? Because I think, landlords set their rent depending on where you live. They might be set by guidelines or they might just be set by the market. And it's very hard to be able to negotiate that downwards. But I do encourage people, look around, see what other people are paying for rent. Just because you think it's the most affordable place, it's possible there might be better deals out there. And consider the size of your space. I know we all love big places, but sometimes for a little while, you might have to downsize a bit to be able to, afford something bigger in the long run.
And one more thought on this, and actually on the insurance example as well, it never hurts to ask. You got
Hmm.
lose by asking.
Yeah.
And if you do maybe a little bit of, homework or legwork, let's say on the rent, let's say you research some, apartments in your neighborhood that are roughly the same square footage, or, same amenities, and you find some that are lower cost, you could go to your landlord and say, hey, I found this comparable apartment. I really would like to just stay where I am, but this is lower. Would you be willing to like match this rent? Same thing with the insurance company. So you can always, especially if you've done a little bit of homework, they might want to keep you as a tenant or as, a customer for their insurance if you've done some legwork and they might price match you.
Hmm. That's a good point.
Mhm.
So we know that Cassandra was feeling good about today. How's everyone else feeling on budgeting?
It's hard work.
Yeah. Jennifer says, I don't have a lot of wiggle room, but I'm doing good with debt pay down by moving balances if necessary. But if I cannot save as much as I would like, what do you think about stocks versus precious metals? Um, that is so far outside of my area of expertise. But I do think that you have great financial advisors on the helpline that might have helpful tips on investing.
And
Hey,
that's a
Tracy.
great question to bring to the helpline because we have so many people coming and asking investment questions,
Mhm.
and we have, let's see, I think we are closing in on about 300 volunteers that are available
Mhm.
and ready and willing to help you. So, yeah, that's the kind of question that we can answer for you. Uh, that's what gets everybody excited is investing and putting your work or your money to work for you.
Yeah,
So yeah, great
yeah.
question.
But I would say that, is make sure you have that emergency fund, put away before you start tying up too much money in the market because those are not liquid assets in the same way. And if you do have appreciated gains, you will be taxed on that. So I think it can all look like great money it's making, but if you're going to need to have a use for it, that's not the best place to have to tap into. Do you have any tips for saving for vacation trips? I'm planning a trip for 2026. I want to save on this trip so that I can fit it inside my budget. Um, I think we would apply the same practices as we went through. So if you know exactly how much you're going to pay for that trip, look at that discretionary bucket that we were talking about, like Kathy noted, right? And so it's like, how much do you have in that discretionary bucket? How much can you put towards this vacation? Um, and how much not? So I see I don't know all the costs. So that's where Chat GPT comes in,
Right,
like we
and
were
so you
talking
could start
before.
with just estimating, right? So like you
Exactly.
can just ballpark like how much is the airfare going to be? How much is the hotel going to
Exactly.
be? Am I willing to stay like at a less expensive hotel maybe if it's a little further from, the beach or the downtown? How much am I going to spend on meals? If I do Airbnb, maybe I eat meals in a little bit. So I
Mhm.
would say, yeah, ballpark the costs. And then let's say you want to take this vacation in June and you've got roughly 6 months and however much it's going to cost, divide that by six, and that's how much you need to save each month. So see what you can do.
Yeah. Someone else had a question. I have two 401ks from previous jobs. Was looking to not withdraw, but to move to build better returns. And then we'll get connected to the call line. I do think, because I mean, like I've worked at other jobs before, and generally, you can transfer those funds into like an IRA if you wanted to sort of consolidate them. So there are a lot of options for that.
Yeah, there are, and that's what we are here for. We are here to provide you with the options that you have,
Hmm.
and give you that education to make the right decision for you. So that is also a very good question for our helpline.
Fine. Yeah. And it's also a good thing to do because I do think just going to the fact of like being able to have all of your assets visible, the more like just having one account or just a view to what your accounts are doing is very helpful because otherwise, it's easy to lose track of that over time. So it's good that you're thinking about it too.
And another thing is to kind of look into finding high interest savings accounts.
Hmm.
So they are out there. You may be able, I think the highest that I've seen was probably around 3.9%, but annual interest rate. But that's still something as opposed to just have it in a checking account or somewhere where it's not working for you. And then it's still available as cash if you need it, but at
Hmm.
least it is making a little bit of a higher interest rate. So that's really great when you're saving for something special, like a vacation or a down payment for something. Because when you access that separate account and you have to sort of go out of your way to do it, it makes you
Hmm.
think more like, do I really need this
Too.
item that I'm going to pull from here to get? Um, unless of course it's an emergency, but it really does help, at least to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. And I think, as particularly if it's growing at a relatively good interest rate, because you see the money, and when you take out money, it's less money that you accrue. The one thing that I would say about those accounts is I think some people don't pay attention to the fact that the interest is taxed, right? So you want to make sure that you just have that in the back of your minds that, you're going to get a statement at the end of the year. You have to file it on your taxes. So don't forget about that piece of it. Great.
Awesome. Any other questions? So definitely take a look at our website. We have all kinds of information there. We have our free financial classes. You can input your email address there and it will save your progress. So you can come back to it. It's gamified, so you can earn badges, which really for me takes the anxiety out of learning. So that is there. Our helpline, our workbook. We're here for you, even if you just need someone to hold you accountable. You can reach out to our helpline. Yeah, so thank you, Martina and
Excuse
Kathy,
me.
for being here.
Yeah.
This has been incredible. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I was on the bus, so I wasn't able to talk. Um, so I wanted a quick question about, you said there's so many good tools out there to budget, and you mentioned that you have one. I know you said that it's an Excel sheet. How do we get to it? I'm somewhat okay on Excel, so I'll probably just look at that. How can you
Yeah.
access that? Like, how can you navigate to that?
Did
So I
you?
have a link in the deck, and I think you can probably just put in the chat, right, Tracy?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so I am putting the link in right now for the workbook, and then I can put a link into um our budget spreadsheet. But one of the first things that I always tell people to do is to check with their bank. If you use online banking, I know a lot of people don't, but if you do use online banking, they may have already put into their app budgeting information. So I know I don't use my bank's budgeting information, but I do know that they will categorize. So when I see things coming out of my checking account, it gives it a category. Um,
Mm.
but so that's always one place to start. There are all kinds of apps. Just be, again, uh, very careful if you're looking there. uh, don't put your personal information in anywhere. If you're just really starting, I would say you can use what's in our workbook. You can use our spreadsheet. You can make your own. You can get with one of our volunteers and they can recommend different places that they know that are tried and true. But someplace like your bank or one of those resources would be the best if you're just starting out.
Okay, so I know again you mentioned about the budgeting. That's something I don't do so well. So I predominantly like, for example, I don't know many of you do that. Use a credit card. So I don't know, like for example, I've got my credit card that I use at Target, Costco, whatever. So when you say to budget to see what's going in, what's coming out, you mentioned like the unnecessary things. Um, are you looking at maybe it'd be good to budget? Say you have you've been to Target, for example, and you bought $45 worth of stuff. Is to carefully look where did you spend that $45 to then, when you budget, write those items down. I wasn't quite sure what you know like.
Yeah. No, so that's exactly what I was suggesting. So like let's say you went into Target, you spent the $45 and part of it was on deodorant, maybe,
Lipstick base.
feminine hygiene products or something of that sort. But then there was a piece of it that was just on, you know, a pack of pens or a,
Yeah,
nice
yeah,
little mug that they had that you saw on the way to
yeah.
the
That you
counter
thought,
or
yeah.
some house fragrance or candle, right? So it's like really
Mm.
thinking about those items that like, did you
Do you
really need
really need it?
it?
Yeah.
You went in there for like the $25 worth, but you probably didn't
Yes.
need the other $20 worth. So that's what we're talking about. And then, but going back over your receipt from Target can help you sort of say, okay, well, oh, wait, I didn't need these other things. The next time you walk into Target, you might be more like, oh, I could have saved myself $20 if I had just stuck to my list. And that's another thing that I think about too. I remember I used to keep really good lists of things when I went into a grocery store. And over time, that practice kind of eroded. But I
Yes.
do think that a lot of times keeping a list can keep us on track.
Yes.
And so, like, you
Yes.
make sure you get what you were looking for and not things that you weren't.
Hmm. So you're basically saying, yeah, do write maybe on the side of the things that you bought you didn't need, and then see how that accumulates over a month or 2 months or whatever.
Exactly. Or try not to accumulate, right? Try to
That
be,
better still,
think
yeah.
back to that
Be
time, right?
conscious of that. Yeah, be conscious
Yeah.
of that. Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. I think that's one of the big practices I don't do well.
Yeah. And I think
But
I say I fall victim to it all the time, right? I see something nice and pretty in a store. And so I'm just like, oh, I
yeah.
think I need
Oh
this,
gosh,
right?
yes, yes, yes.
You can get me with any shiny thing. Um,
I think too, one of the things that can really help with that sort of impulse of going in the store buying, if you like Target, I'm not really sure, but I believe Walmart, you can order online and pick up. And I don't think there's a fee for that, but you have to check, obviously. But one of my warehouse stores locally here where I am, their prices, whether you do this online or go in the store, are the same. But if you reach a certain threshold, like if your order is over $50, there's no fee for you to go and order everything online and then they deliver it to your car. And to
mhm.
me, I think, I mean, even if they did have a nominal fee, it probably would be less than what I would have spent if I went in that store myself. So I have done that now with groceries and my warehouse store combined. It's really kept the budget with only getting the items I need because if you send me into the grocery store, I'm coming out with everything and
Yes,
probably not what I went in there for. So
yes, yes. It's easily done.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then some of them do offer that pickup service for free. So, and that's a great
Mm.
way to save a little money.
but you also have to be careful because some of the places will charge you more per item if
Hmm.
you're shopping online. So if
Mm.
you're shopping online and picking up in store, there may not be a fee to do that, but what you're not realizing is if the same a gallon of milk is actually 10 cents more. If
Wow.
you would have gone in the store and got it, it would have been 10 cents less. So it's just kind of weighing the options and I guess if you're paying 10 cents more because it's a time thing, then it may be worth it. But again,
Mhm.
weighing out that.
Yeah. But the point is that it just takes work, right? And you have to review and you have to look at all the options and consider what's best for you. Um, but you can use, technology tools and such, and like, ChatGPT to, hopefully try to help figure it out. I do wonder if that would be a good prompt to give it. Like if it could tell you, where the cheapest milk is, what stores charge extra. There might be things that you could find out on an internet search.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for the links too.
You're welcome.
Well, this has really been a great session, and I'll leave you with another thought too on this is don't underestimate the power of your friends and your family. Um, keeping you on track. My two best friends, we talk about very transparently about our budgets. And, we vacation, our families vacation together every year, but it has taken us a long time to be able to do this and plan. And if you're just starting the process of going through the budget, one great way to start is to go through your bank statements from maybe the past 2, 3 months. And that gives you sort of a foundation to start basing your numbers off of. But lean into, your friends and your family to hold you accountable. And then it becomes like this little friendly competition of, oh, I saved $50 at the grocery store this week. So really, you've got to make it somewhat interesting for you. And a budget doesn't mean diet, so build in those things that you want. If you can, meet get all of your needs met. But if you want Starbucks once a month, build that into the budget. There's no reason why
Mhm.
you can't if you have the money to do it, to give yourself that reward. So
Yeah. It's funny. I remember like as prices were going up, my aunt and I, when I would see her, we play a game of like, guess how much I spent on groceries this week. And it was a good way to think about like, both, what we were buying, and how much we were spending on it and, readjusting.
mhm. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been wonderful, and it will be available for you to view it again. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to come to our helpline. That is what we are here for. And thank you so much. Check out our website for our other upcoming events as well.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
So thank you, ladies. This has really, really been great. I love when we can have these discussions, and it's really inspiring.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's for all of us, right? It gives you good reminders.
That's for sure. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording, maybe. Oh dear, it seems to not want to let me stop recording.
That's fine.